the opportunity that's arisen from that is with this infrastructure layer that we have in the middle of the supply chain, where we're able to capture and validate very high quality data, transaction data, we've actually realized that maybe serving the micro merchants through an appless solution may be the way to go. Right here, we're not trying to change user behavior. We're not trying to get people who don't even have a smartphone. They have to borrow their kid's smartphone,
Right.
to make things work. And it's almost like back to basics. It's like, hey, we come to where the customer is, right? Build the technology for the tech illiterate, to put it in another way.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's internet and digital economy, or as we like to call it, ASEAN Innovation. In this episode, we have a returning guest, none other than the CEO and co-founder of AwanTunai, Dino Setiawan. Hey, Dino. Thanks for coming back on the show. It's been, 2 years? A little bit more, almost 2 years now since our
Yeah,
last
Paulo,
conversation.
what a wild 2 years it's been.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Who knew? Who knew that all this stuff would have happened in these past 2 years? But yeah, definitely a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. I highly recommend for those tuning in right now, after you listen to our conversation, to check out, if you're interested in learning about how AwanTunai came to be from its early days. We actually had a chance to talk to Dino just about that, and check out our previous episodes, which I'll also link in the podcast description. But just a quick intro for anybody who's tuning in for the first time and hearing about AwanTunai and Dino for the first time. So AwanTunai is very much, I would say, in the intersection of bringing together fintech and software to really, digitize and enable all of these like supply chain ecosystems, enabling MSMEs across Indonesia. I think $100 billion market, the traditional offline FMCG industry. Since our last conversation, AwanTunai has sort of done a lot of expansion, I would say, in terms of their product that we're definitely going to talk about. Dino, on the other hand, is, for those who are hearing about him for the first time, as I mentioned earlier, CEO of AwanTunai, but also very much a seasoned entrepreneur and banking professional, has been in that industry for quite some time, and has been with AwanTunai for several years now. Would love to, actually get your perspective on these past 2 years. So one thing I've recently been asking a lot of our guests is to share sort of an update, or talk about their role in like numbers, because everybody in this industry likes numbers, right? So maybe you can share with us, like, what are three numbers that could best describe how AwanTunai has grown or evolved since our last call.
Sure, sure. Well, speaking of numbers, you mentioned I'm an ex-banker. I actually did 12 years in banking and now almost 12 years in fintech. So
Wow.
it's
Okay.
almost a one-to-one ratio here.
Right.
Right. But three numbers for AwanTunai. Well, look, it's been an amazing last 2 years. We've actually grabbed 8x growth in the number of suppliers, and that's boosted up a similar growth, 8x, in our embedded financing, which is now up to around $800 million annualized dispersed. Now, what fuels a lot of that lending is really the valuable transaction data that our ERP systems capture. And that's a whopping 14x growth from 2021 that we capture within our traditional supply chain space. And these are like wholesalers and distributors. And just by coincidence, also a 14x growth in contribution margin. I mean, yes, lending makes a lot of money, so we've always been positive contribution margin.
Right. I think that has been the whole, I guess, thesis and purpose sort of AwanTunai, to sort of prove that lending can make money in this
Yeah,
this segment.
for the longest of times, VCs just said that, oh, you're already making money, and this was in the easy money days, and we were the ugly village, but now it's like, oh, okay, you're getting close to profitability, so hopefully this is our moment in the sun.
Right. And you did talk about that flywheel you have of the embedded financing plus the ERP, which we'll dive into a little bit later. But first, I also wanted to catch up on yourself as a leader, as a CEO, how you've evolved with yourself as a leader. How has your role or leadership approach changed since we last talked?
Yeah, well, look, 8x growth, right, in volumes, 14x growth in data capture. Well, I have to admit, the complexity of the organization has really increased significantly, and that's just running with a single financing product, right? I
Right.
mean, and that's the beauty of once you get product market fit. All we do is inventory purchase financing on the monetization side. And look, it's been a continuous steep learning curve, understanding key issues from every department, really how best to align them, organize the team. And it's really forced me to better understand the whole organization as a whole, right? Both when to go wider, really understand the interdepartment dependencies, and at times when to go deep when this you really need to just troubleshoot a particular issue and really go all the way down to the field to really uncover what's going on. Yeah, I mean, it just really felt that maturing of being able to handle a much larger, more complex organization.
Would you mind sharing like an example of that, especially that third point that you made about, looking when to go wide versus when to go deep?
Sure. So let's say initially when we first started this product in 2019, we only had one small capital lender. It was just one of the banks, and now we're running with multiple lending facilities, all with multiple differing covenants, risk acceptance criteria, and even geographies. Right, the money comes from from different
Right.
places, and this is just in one department, treasury. The complexity of the asset allocation there. Before it just there's only one lender, so it just goes there, and now needing to allocate the assets in a way that's fair and non-discriminatory, also managing multiple pockets of liquidity. And that's just one department, right, where the complexity is, I would say, almost like 5x,
Right, right.
from when we first ran it.
Yeah. So I get, but I would say like it's a good problem to have, right? Like it's good
Indeed,
to
indeed.
have
I
that.
mean, yeah, we have to graduate, right, at some
Right, right,
point.
right, right.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how the business has evolved. We talked about how you've evolved. Now, I also want to ask how the market itself has evolved. And you've been targeting MSMEs, specifically in the FMCG industry. How has their, I would say, like response and their engagement to this whole digitization wave evolved since we last talked?
Well, this has been an interesting trend that we've seen both within AwanTunai and what we hear out in the market. True, genuine app adoption is expensive. We've seen a lot of heavy promotional budgets to get GTV out in the market,
Mm,
and with the resultant struggle to actually monetize that particular user base. Now, from our side, because we started life off as a lender, I mean, we were making money from the get go, but a lot of the risk management scaling that we wanted to build out, relied upon utilization of a mobile app. So certainly, we were there in that game trying to push for app adoption in this kind of micro tech illiterate space, which we found to be
mm,
very expensive and challenging. Now, one upside is over the last 2 years, we've really grown our ERP infrastructure and adoption at the middle layer of the supply chain. So these are, all these independent wholesalers that, some have no incumbent system, others have that we've been able to replace. And the opportunity that's arisen from that is with this infrastructure layer that we have in the middle of the supply chain, where we're able to capture and validate very high quality data, transaction data, we've actually realized that maybe serving the micro merchants through an appless solution may be the way to go. Right here, we're not trying to change user behavior. We're not trying to get people who don't even have a smartphone. They have to borrow their kid's smartphone,
right.
to make things work. And it's almost like back to basics. It's like, hey, we come to where the customer is, right? Build the technology for the tech illiterate, to put it in another way.
Right. So how does that conversation differ, like compared to say a conversation where you're trying to get them to use an app versus this like appless servicing that you're trying to
Oh,
implement?
yeah, it's been night and day. So we've been experimenting with actually having our suppliers essentially run with the financing, for their customers. And when it's that, human approach, when it's messaged by a trusted person, for that micro merchant, we've seen over 10x the conversion rate of when we, utilize app-driven channels before. So it's super exciting, although it comes with a whole host of tech challenges, right? Because what we're essentially outsourcing here is our sales function. With that comes with a lot of potential fraud risk. Risk management, fraud management is always been in our DNA. And a lot of the technologies that we invest in is really, well, okay, how can we pass on this sales function to our
Mm.
kind of network while still controlling for the fraud risk?
So I guess, yeah, outsourcing that sales function so that you could just invest more in the risk management side.
Absolutely.
And yeah, well, yeah, for our listeners, stay tuned and we'll definitely dive into that aspect as well. But first, I wanted to also ask about you. You mentioned that you've been targeting this middle layer in this value chain, but since we last talked 2021, I think at the time you had initially started with merchants, and then through the pandemic, that you could also do financing for the wholesalers. And then more recently, you've been also doing that with higher up that value chain, I guess the distributors and principals as well. So, what have been the implications of that? And I guess you touched on it a little bit with the whole sales discussion, but maybe other implications operationally with this expansion?
Back in 2019, when we first launched the supply chain financing product, it was a very manual affair where we had our risk teams gathering paper sales invoices, purchase orders, entering that into the database. It worked from a risk perspective, but it's not scalable, right? It was just much too expensive, much too high touch to really scale up. And that's when we came to the realization that, wow, we had to build an ERP system here to really capture all this data. And sometimes in business, luck plays a factor. And with the
Right.
pandemic, the luck factor for AwanTunai was all of a sudden, all of our suppliers that we were trying to push, these POS systems, inventory management systems into, was suddenly starved of capital. The banks literally ceased lending. Some, well, in fact, most tried to pull their credit lines within this SME segment. So a lot of our suppliers came to us for financing, and that really drove the initial opportunity to bundle the supply chain financing with a supply chain operating system. And from there, that's where we really took off. Right now, we've got over 500 suppliers with combined sales of over 3 billion US per annum. And I believe that's almost, if not on par or exceeding like the big unicorns out there that have tried to go into this, mitra type of environment. And the great thing is that at this middle layer here, the data capture is very efficient, right? There's enough concentration of data for us to capture it economically and also validate it economically. And that validation is really the key differentiation for AwanTunai here. We've seen a lot of folks who've like mountains of GTV really struggle to try and monetize that through financial services, namely lending, because it's such a high margin business. But for us, validating is really the key to enabling this financing to work, right? $3 billion of sales, and we're able to lend now over $800 million annualized. So that's a
Right,
really
right.
high ratio, right?
Do you see this whole that you talk about that luck factor of the wholesalers you mentioned like being starved of capital, and that sort of provided the opportunity to, oh, maybe we can do like channel financing, right? Or use that data that we're connecting from the transactions to actually lend money as well to higher up the supply chain, or to facilitate financing higher up the supply chain. Do you see that as another factor going into the current market that we're in? Do you see it continuing to drive the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Like initially back in 2019, we thought that supply chain financing would be more just a micro SME market.
Mm.
Where again, right, due to that totally unexpected pandemic effect, customers came to us wanting kind of like larger scale SME financing. So that actually led us to design a product specifically for the supply
Mm.
segment, something that we probably wouldn't have done without the customers coming to us, just because
Right.
we felt that, oh, okay, here you're kind of rubbing shoulders with the banks, and that's always tough, right? As a
Right.
fintech company, you're always going to be more expensive than the banks. But we actually saw the gap in the market as the suppliers came to us, and hence now our product is highly sought after by our banking partners.
This market definitely has been different from 2019, certainly with the pandemic. Definitely a lot more appeal given that you've expanded into the and sort of validated that solution across different types of business segments. And so how does Awantunai's business, specifically that cash flow financing approach, stand in today's? There are a lot of fintechs, lots of platforms offering these kinds of service to MSMEs. Where does Awantunai stand in this whole like ocean?
Well, I would say we were the pioneers in really transaction-based financing, right? No loan asset gets generated unless there's an inventory purchase transaction. And look, I'm kind of flattered, right? They say imitation is the best form of flattery. We've seen exact carbon copies of our lending program being offered by a lot of competitors out there, be it by fintech or marketplaces alike. Although we've noted that they are doing the lending without investing in a full proper supply chain ERP system that we built to optimize for fraud detection. So as far as I hear in the market, we're still certainly the best performing as far as risk management is concerned. And it's a little bit annoying, but I'm a bit proud of it that it's known in the market that, oh, if you're an AwanTunai customer, that's automatic approval. It annoys my team because they do all the hard work of the risk assessment and all that, and then yes, someone else just
The
auto
brand
approve.
precedes the the risk assessment. Right. But yeah, I wanted to ask, like, is it a matter of just the resource allocation to actually build out the supply chain ERP system? What's holding like the rest of the market back, you think?
Well, here's an interesting thing. When back in 2019, when we realized that, oh, we needed to build one again, right, the usual build versus buy analysis was made. And when we looked at a lot of the third-party ERP systems in the market, we realized that, it's not strong, or it's not designed to the extent that it can really detect the fraud that we know is out in the market, right? And back in 2019, we were managing for this manually, so we knew a lot of the I guess the issues that the ERP system would need to be able to detect for, and we couldn't see that in the kind of general market ERP systems out there. So that's why we ended up building the ERP system from scratch, specifically focused on fraud detection. And maybe that being the differentiating factor, right? A lot of the kind of e-commerce marketplace folks, they've scaled up the systems to optimize for GTV capture, right? And sometimes there's a bit of a perverse incentive where, hey, you know what? If there's some fraudulent GTV in there, close.
As long as we get the number.
Well, yeah, because it's driving up the valuation, right?
Right.
Be it real or not. So maybe the incentives weren't aligned there, because I don't think the e-commerce companies built their platforms with lending in mind, right? It's, okay, lending was kind of more of an afterthought. Whereas for us, because we started life off as a lender, and again, right, risk management is really part of our DNA. We custom built the system to really detect fraud.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely an important point to emphasize. And speaking of sort of the differentiator, we're actually going to dive into those two aspects. First, the ERP, and then the whole fraud detection and risk management. So with the ERP, maybe you can illustrate for our listeners, because we've been talking about it high level. Maybe you can illustrate concretely how that, has been changing the way that they operate, and what that means in terms of like long-term benefits, even for like these like business owners.
Look, there's always going to be some kind of system out there. It's an old kind of a market. Players have been around for many years. So, most of the larger suppliers have certainly developed some kind of custom system, because it is a very fragmented software market in the space. Now, where our kind of operating system and financing has really played a strong factor is we've really enabled a lot of the best performing suppliers to grow. And when I say grow, I'm not talking about 10, 20%. We're talking about 4x, 5x, even more, right? So one of our best performing wholesalers, when we met them, they only had, and this is a wholesaler in Jogja. I think they only had 2 warehouses. Once we were able to put in the control systems, right, from our operating system, to enable them to manage more remote sites and near unlimited financing for growth, within 1.5 years, they're now at 11 warehouses.
Wow.
So, yeah. I mean, no bank will lend 500%, increase, right? It's too risky, but that's the beauty of our model. Not only do we lend, but our operating system also helps them manage their business and gives us very deep visibility into their operations.
And so that ERP has definitely helped with enabling these businesses to expand and grow. But I think also another key aspect of that, as we've been talking about, and if you're still tuning in, then congratulations, you finally reached, at least for me, the exciting part of this conversation, which is the whole risk management aspect, which is also protecting these customers as well, and sort of this whole ecosystem that you've built. So maybe you can share a little bit about how that approach to risk management has evolved over the past few years.
So there's a quote I want to give from my chief science officer, which I actually found, very educational. She told me that artificial intelligence can't beat a trained human being. And I was a bit taken aback there. I said, really? I thought, we're always sold, right? AI models can take in 50,000 variables, and no human can manage that. But, there was a very interesting point around structured data and unstructured data that she explained to me. And it says, look, yes, you can have deep learning models, right? But they operate at the scale where you need almost tens of millions of data points and users. And only very few companies on the planet actually have that type of data sets. for the rest of us mere mortal kind of startups, deep learning is not feasible, certainly with the data sets that we have access to. So the thinking there is that the humans need to train the AI engines. And by that, she gave a very simplified example. So let's say take a credit verification call. Before a loan gets dispersed, let's say one of our credit officers would call up the borrower and say that, let's validate your name, your address, that you and that you borrowed, the loan. So that's kind of 3 variables in a structured data model. Like it's kind of like just a binary input almost. Now, the human aspect of it is that call is actually an unstructured data event.
Okay.
The experienced underwriter, when listening to, is this, confirming the name, the address, and the borrowing amount. If the borrower answers in a unusual way or in a suspicious way, well, an experienced underwriter will actually ask more questions, right? And it's that +1 kind of unstructured data variable that doesn't end up in a 50,000 variable model, and that's where the human element comes in. So at AwanTunai, we've actually always been about validating, a risk process or outcome, whether it's actually possible with humans, right? Well, I've had a lot of AI credit scoring vendors peddle their products to me, and the usual selling line is that, oh yeah, we just push the users through it, and it starts, separating the good users from the bad users. But look, fraudsters have become very sophisticated, and they almost like game the system. Well, they know, well, okay, if I make 3 successful payments, the limits go up, and then, I'll hit them even harder, right? Once the limits go higher. So I think, you really need to understand how to manage risk before you can build the science models that can, admittedly, eventually surpass human performance. But again, right, to get that initial, I think, right set of variables and proxies, there really needs to be experienced humans guiding the AI engine development.
Ultimately, AI is based on human activities. So definitely, it's sort of just the output, right? Like the ingredients have to be, well-founded as well. And I think that's definitely part of the whole, I think, a theme of our discussion today, which, started all the way from that whole appless discussion. And now it's sort of like going back to basics with how humans analyze risk and really getting sort of that best-in-class expertise to actually train the models that you have. And speaking of ensuring that the humans that are training the AI are actually, really good at their job and sort of scaling that, what have been the challenges so far in ensuring that, you're able to do this across different sort of categories, different kinds of scenarios and use cases?
Yeah, look, the science behind the automation of very manual, right, field risk management operations is not trivial. Back in the early days when we're thinking, my God, how do we automate a field survey, right? I mean, that's a human being going down to the shop and seeing that, okay, is the borrower actually the owner of the shop? I mean, we can't send a drone down there to do that. But a lot of the science work, which, we've actually patented, is finding the right proxies. So the great thing is, if you have a very strong baseline of good decisioning outcomes, from our humans, that allows the science team to really start looking at a whole range of proxies to say that, well, okay, what data points, be it mobility, transactional data, and of course, credit data, would mirror the human decisioning outcome, right? A field survey agent will say X. Well, okay, what are all the proxies that get close to X? Certainly it's been a challenge finding the right proxies, and to kind of wind back to our early days, like back in 2017 and 18. I mean, we did follow a similar methodology, although our science team was very different back then. But we couldn't find strong proxies in publicly available data sets, right? Be it purchasing data from telcos, scraping things off social media. There was just too much noise, and I guess in data science, it's like a second order or even third order level of data. It's just not predictive enough. But certainly when we went into the supply chain, a lot of the inventory purchase data, the inventory sales data was highly predictive of business and credit performance.
And speaking of how AwanTunai has definitely evolved into a different operation from when it started back in, when it was still figuring things out in 2017. And certainly, I think for investors out there, if you guys are, hearing about AwanTunai, and that may remind you, I don't know, of some other businesses in other emerging markets. And I'm sure you know of these like other businesses. Are there any sort of learnings or anything that you don't want to do that they're doing, or anything that you see in these other markets that influence or impact the way that you approach things with AwanTunai?
I would say, two critical factors, right? Truly execution is one of them, and also building that right team. In the early days, 2017, 2018, it was just diabolically difficult to get data scientists, right? It was all the rage. And, of course, we had a couple of more data engineers actually within our team to try and build out, some kind of AI engine. And we were heavily reliant on, third-party off-the-shelf type of machine learning solutions. But look, over time, how we've really been able to make this leapfrog, right, to now the majority of our risk assessment is actually run by engine. So again, we don't need humans to go into the field. We don't need humans to underwrite. Majority of our transactions is run by engine. Look, we've got an amazing science team, literally spanning the world. Our chief science officer is based in Chicago. We have folks in the UK, China. Oh, actually, my data scientist in China just joined the Stanford computer science PhD program. There's only 50 people in the world each year that get into that program, right? So this, in a way, this whole work from anywhere, again, right, another kind of a strange quirk of the pandemic. Without the pandemic, I don't think I could have gotten, those folks, right? I mean, how do you set up such a dispersed remote science operation? Yet, when this whole work from home or work from anywhere was normalized, it really enabled us to cherry pick a lot of the top talent across the world. That comes down to execution as well. Look, we see a lot of copycats out there. But again, right, I mentioned we have a sense that their risk performance is nowhere near ours. And it again, what we see, a lot of the kind of risk management practices out there, it's still reliant on more publicly available data, right? Credit bureaus, even telco. Whereas for us, we did the hard work. We built a full-blown ERP system from scratch with which not only to capture transactional data, but to be able to validate that it's real. Lots of stories, right, of traditional suppliers having, double bookkeeping or triple bookkeeping. So it's like, well, how do you know what's real? And well, that's what we built. We built a system that can, not only capture, but validate.
I did mention world best-in-class talent, and that's definitely not a hyperbole. Sort of they're actually really some of the best in the world. So yeah, it's great to see that that the organization has evolved in that way. And speaking of evolution again, yeah, something I ask a lot of the growth stage founders and leaders who come on our show is, what are the things that you've had to let go of or unlearn as a leader? Because obviously, whenever we come into these roles, you have these like assumptions and baggage that you carry. But in order to really stay on and endure, like you have to sort of let go of things. So for you, what were those things that you've had to sort of unlearn as you've grown AwanTunai now and been, like, as you mentioned, 12 years of being a fintech founder?
Well, look, I've felt genuine growth in my personal managerial capacity. Also the ability to just comprehend an increasingly complex business. And with that, I guess I wouldn't say unlearn, but I guess it comes with a more maturing approach on handling a range of issues, be it around talent management, decision making under uncertainty, strategic planning. And if I was to sum it up, I guess it'll be an evolution on how I make decisions, right? Certainly less knee-jerk reactions, not necessarily accepting things at face value. I guess it really comes with experience. You start being able to make better decisions with limited information, or understanding how to kind of double click on certain the internal data points which need to be validated before making that business decision.
Even reflecting how AwanTunai itself has evolved as a business to optimize for the right variables. You yourself as a leader has also learned how to optimize for the right variables internally. I don't know, in the future somebody will do some model on that, but maybe too many data points.
Goodness, replace me with an AI. Huh?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that leads me into our MinuteMasterclass corner, which Dino hasn't gone through yet, although he's been on the show a few times already. So this is a new segment where we try to parse fast learnings and fast insights for our listeners out there. And in particular, you talked about your chief science officer, you talked about your chief like data scientist as well as being some of the best in the world, and obviously you talked about how the pandemic with the work from anywhere contributing to that accessibility to this talent. Would love for you to also share with us like what has been a key learning in actually convincing them to join the ship, right? Like with this talent from all over the world, like why would they choose to like focus on a business that's working in Indonesia specifically with MSMEs specifically and doing lending specifically, right?
One of the interesting realizations is it's actually not about the money. I mean these are
Mm.
extremely expensive talent, right? But certainly talent that we probably wouldn't have been able to afford unless there was that X factor. And the X factor, I guess, with a lot of technical talent that we've been able to attract is that this is something interesting they want to work on. So my chief science officer, super experienced data scientist, I was actually curious, right? Because the competing job offer she had was mind blowing. I mean, I won't reveal it, but it's a
Right.
huge US corporate, leadership position there. And I chased her for 3 years, right? So when she finally accepted, I was super grateful. But I also asked, so why did you join us? And she said that, look, I really enjoy creating new science. And she felt that our data set was unique in this world. And I said, really? Unique? And she said, don't get me wrong. There's a mountain of data on, customer purchasing patterns, right? Be it from e-commerce companies or even supermarkets, right? All of this data is readily available. Even on supply chain data, a lot of that sits within the big principals. But principals tend to have that data more just for their brands. Right? So what she said was that, well, AwanTunai is collecting a whole range of supply chain purchase transaction data at scale. And she says that especially in the traditional segment, right? Traditional is non-supermarkets, modern convenience stores. In this traditional segment, which is actually for a lot of emerging markets, the majority of the supply chain, right? In Indonesia, it's 80% of the supply chain. She mentioned that this data it's not visible at scale. Like she's seen a few kind of data science papers that has collected this data, but it was more through, focus group discussions in Africa. Whereas with our infrastructure, our ERPs in place in all these middle layer kind of suppliers, we're collecting it at scale. And she feels that this is new data sets where new technologies and science can be developed. And that's what gets her excited. So, right, it's not about the money, right? It has to be something that's really interesting for top talent to work on.
Right. And you did mention a small detail there, which I wanted to zoom in on, is the fact that you chased her for 3 years.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to know, like, what did you change, I guess, in your pitch? Or maybe because apparently it was the problem and sort of the nature of the problem that actually attracted her, right? Is it how you framed the problem or like what she saw or what you gave her?
Well,
Yeah.
for her, it was really our data set. So when we first chased her, this was back in, 2018, I think.
Right.
Again, we were only sourcing publicly available data. We would purchase
Right.
telco data or try to scrape everything you can imagine off that smartphone. So it's data that everyone else also has, right? There's nothing truly proprietary about it. But once, we made that transition into the traditional supply chain with like the start or the beginnings of an ERP system, that's when the data collection became very interesting for her, or the data sets became very interesting for her.
And so if you were to give a class on this to some, fellow founders out there or folks who are CEOs or leaders trying to hire this like top class talent, what would be the key takeaway for this class for them? Is it to chase them for 3 years or
Well, no, I
what is
mean,
it?
look, people always talk about passion, right? And
Right.
and different folks have different passions. Again, I mentioned in business sometimes there is luck, and I just caught her at just the right time of her career. She was
Right.
sick and tired of US corporate politics and all that. I mean, she's been a CTO of large organizations, right? 200 engineers plus. So again, sometimes the stars just need to align. But if I was giving a lecture, I would call it building technology for the tech illiterate. And I think that has a real interesting hook point for a lot of folks, because what I see as a real barrier of adoption out there to tech adoption is this kind of a well-beaten path that, all right, we're gonna get some lady in a village to download an app on a smartphone, and make the magic work. I mean, that's great on paper, right, on a pitch deck, but hitting that user adoption, especially when the user tech illiterate or they don't even have a phone, is an entirely, that I think is some very challenging problems that is exciting to solve.
So on that note, I want to get into a rapid fire round now. And I prepared some new questions as well for Dino, since he's done this a couple of times already. So the first one is, what digital technology or innovation excites you the most today?
All right, I'm a bit old school here. Like, I was actually a kind of hard sciences guy way back as a teenager. So actually, recent breakthroughs in fusion energy, that's always clickbait for me.
Right. I mean, thank you for not saying ChatGPT. Well, this was like last year, right, when they sort of discovered that, they could produce more energy.
Positive energy, that's right.
Yeah, right. If you were to produce like a Netflix or OTT series, what would it be about, and what would be the title?
It would almost be kind of like that old series, like Silicon Valley, right? Going through what a startup goes through. There's things that we see in the field that is, you just can't make it up. It's that's crazy.
Would it still be like sitcomish? Would you make it sitcomish like Silicon Valley, or would you like just change the genre?
I think we all need to laugh once in a while, and it's always good to laugh at ourselves, especially as an industry, and given all the crazy shenanigans that's going on.
Yeah, good to not take things too seriously all the time. Looking back now, what is a skill? It could be a soft skill or hard skill you believe you should have learned back in your time as a student.
Definitely stress management.
Next question. If there is something you could automate in your job just by wishing for it, what aspect of your role would that be?
Definitely performance evaluation. Just such a difficult and painful thing to do.
Right. I guess the question there is like, what are the proxies for the data?
Indeed.
Like, what time is the person waking up? Like, when did they get their coffee? All that stuff. Next question. What is your favorite go-to destination in Southeast Asia? Or what trip are you most looking forward to taking in the region?
It's fast becoming Bali, right? It's definitely the kind of a go-to place now for business meetings. And again, right, maybe there's more to stress management than meets the eye. Everyone needs it.
And speaking of stress management, like, what's your favorite activity to de-stress?
I am a PC gamer, so computer games is my favorite for downtime.
Right. What's the latest PC game you've
I've been playing World of Warships for quite some time.
Oh, okay. Nice. What is something that you've read or taken up recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Well, it's not actually recent, but meditation really comes highly recommended.
Was it Wendy? I think Wendy also recommended meditating.
Yeah, well, Wendy and Rama were actually the ones that got me into it, and I've been super grateful for that.
Has it become sort of like a company thing as well in AwanTunai, or?
Actually, now that you've mentioned it, it hasn't. But note
that
to self there. Note to self, yes.
Thank you so much, Dino, for coming back on the show after 2 years. Hopefully, don't have to wait another 2 years to have something new to talk about. And yeah, thanks for sharing and really diving deep into sort of the counterintuitive sort of learnings. I know, like, in this industry, we sort of have these like quote unquote truths that we share and talk about that seem pretty intuitive, like, oh, just everybody needs to have a phone or needs to have an app in their hand to be able to do things more efficiently, but maybe that's not always the case. Or even on the AI front, like that, simply having the AI right there already like solves all the issues, and it's not exactly like always a one-shot thing. So thanks for really like clarifying those things for us, and hopefully our listeners out there have something to take away from this, regardless if they're in the industry or not. But yeah, thanks again for coming on, Dino.
My pleasure, Paulo. Thanks for inviting.